Welcome back to another episode of the Casey Campbell podcast. Casey Campbell with you. Of course, we are pleased to be joined by the MHSAA Executive Director Mark Ewell for one of his. We like to do these every so now and then to see what's going on up in Lansing with the MHSAA. Mark, thanks as always for coming on.
You bet.
All right, so pretty successful fall season. You just kind of recap fall sports, how they kind of went for you guys.
It was the most normal thing we've been through since March of 2020. I don't think there was a single COVID conversation during the summer leading into the fall, and really it was business as usual for our schools. Preliminary numbers, I think our fall attendance was as good as it's been in the 99-year history of the MHSAA. So very good start to the school year, and we're hoping that continues here as we now transition from fall to winter.
Okay, so with the fall sport, a couple of the policies that the council put in place with the 300-mile rule and the undue influence rule. How did those two things go this year?
So the competition and travel tweaks that we made, I think, really gave schools more flexibility. And long story short, MHSAA schools can now play out-of-state schools as long as those contests take place in a border state area. So we had one of our PSL schools, I forget off the top of my head exactly which one it was. They lost an opponent, and they actually found a school in New Jersey.
That was Cass Tech, I think.
I think you're right. I was gonna guess Cass Tech, but didn't want to be wrong. Well, Cass Tech and the school out of New Jersey ended up playing in Youngstown, Ohio. So that was just one tangible example of now allowing our schools to play anybody in the country, but with the caveat that the competition either needs to happen in Michigan or in one of our border states. That was a really good change. The other thing, when it came to following junior high and middle school kids on social media by school coaches, if these kids are not in your district, I think time will tell. But that was an important first step to make those lines more clear, more definitive. And frankly, if I'm a high school coach at high school A, there's no reason I should be following kids who are not part of my district, who attend other schools, other districts, not only from a possible recruiting competitive equity standpoint, but being the father of a teenage daughter myself, who's a pretty good athlete. When she was in junior high or middle school, I don't know that there would be any reason for someone outside of her district, an adult, a male adult especially, to be following her on social media. So those were two big changes that got made for this year. And the scheduling one, we saw tangible we're going to see that same thing with some of the winter holiday tournaments, invitationals coming up. I just think it gave our schools a lot more flexibility.
Where are we at in terms of, a lot of, I know the transfer conversation has been out there, kids going from school to other school with everything that happened, with Belleville last year and all the other things. Where are we at in terms of that? Is there anything that you guys are doing to, prevent, maybe those things from happening or something like that? So
the number of transfers that we have now versus 6-7 years ago, before the transfer rule got changed, the number of transfers are drastically down. Right now, when you change schools without a change of residence, without a move between divorced parents, those kinds of things, kids are now ineligible for a full calendar year in the sports that they played. So when that part of the rule got changed now a handful of plus years ago, the number of kids, because Casey, it was common for let's say a high school football player with the old rule that when I changed schools, I just sat for a semester. We'd have all kinds of kids that went to school A to play football their freshman year. They'd transfer in January, sit the spring semester, and then I'm at school number 2 as a sophomore and school number 3 as a junior. Well, that with the current transfer rule, all of that has disappeared. you know, I would love to live in a world where every kid had a press conference as a seventh grader and they put on their hat of the high school that they're going to go to, and they never, obviously it's a little tongue in cheek. But you know, the number of kids, I would love kids just to remain at one school, and for all kids in all communities to really rely on being homegrown kids. That the kids who went to elementary school here and into the middle school here, that those are the kids in the high school. And the reality is that's not society. You look at the college level, you look at other states. And so what we've tried to do is maintain a transfer rule that our schools want, that our schools believe does discourage kids from bouncing from school to school to school. And it's something that we look at certainly each and every day.
Okay. I haven't got I don't think you've been on for me to ask this, but if you remember a few months back, there was I believe there was a bill that was introduced, I believe in the Michigan House, surrounding NIL for high schoolers. So I think when people's reaction first started is like, oh no, here we go. But I believe your office worked a lot on that bill. They were in conversations with that. What's that, and where is that at right now?
So NIL, I think if we put on our college hat or college prism here for a second, NIL makes sense at the college level because at the Power Five level, it is a billion-dollar industry. In this billion-dollar industry, there are lots of adults, administrators, and coaches who are now millionaires. And I think it's reasonable that kids who are part of a billion-dollar industry being run by millionaires, that NIL for college kids makes some sense, because shouldn't the student athletes in this billion-dollar industry be getting a small piece of the action? You take the same concept and now apply it to high schools. High school athletic departments are just trying to break even. The average coaching salary right now in our state is about $3,200 for a coach. There is no billion-dollar industry. There are no millionaires. But yet to somehow say, well, high school kids should be able to make money, I just think that college and high school are apples to oranges. Nevertheless, we did have a bill that got introduced in our state house. Bill, I think it was 4816, that would allow high school kids some NIL opportunities. Given the fact that the House, the Senate, and the governor's office currently are all occupied by the Democratic Party, given the fact that this bill was introduced by a Democrat, just on the straight politics of this, pretty good chance that it would pass. So and I give the bill sponsor a lot of credit, did engage us in conversations right away. We were able to basically share, well, here's what we could live with. To fast forward to the end of the conversation, we could live with NIL in our state if it's for individual opportunities for individual kids. Booster clubs can't become collectives. Alumni groups can't become consortiums where we're going to try and get money together to influence where kids go to school, where kids stay. And really the one reason where I think limited NIL would make some sense is if you get that once every 10-year type athlete who has a phenomenal freshman year here in Michigan, sophomore year here in Michigan, and if our state doesn't allow for any NIL opportunities, I would hate for that kid to have to leave Michigan and go to another state for his or her junior or senior year where they can make NIL money. So it's got to be limited. It's got to be narrow. And that's really where the House bill is, where things ended. So it passed the House, but Casey, the Senate took no action on it. So when the legislative year ended, when they adjourned here about 3 weeks ago, they basically start over when the calendar turns to January. So the next legislative session will start in January. It will now go House to the Senate. We'll see what the Senate says. And then if something does pass, it could end up on the governor's desk. But as I said, we did have a seat at the table. We were given lots of opportunity for input. I don't think it's needed or necessary. However, if it is going to move forward, we've been able to have lots of good input, and we're thankful for that.
Okay. In terms of, there's been a lot of conversation, and I've asked you this so many times in the last year about where what the football playoffs could possibly do with the current format, and possibly, there's been ideas talking about going back to the format we had during COVID. Where are we at toward, if do you think the playoffs could change? It could possibly change next year. Where are we at toward that?
Well, I guess I'd start by looking at the playoffs just completed, and I would ask, what's not working? Got on social media the night of the selection show, which frankly, there's not much mystery in terms of who's in and who's not. But the pull of the selection show is where we're going and who we're going to play. In the 300 or so communities that were part of the football playoffs this year, if you looked at social media, that was a huge deal in an awful lot of places with watch parties and those kinds of things. So that whole thing of communities having to qualify. Now, granted, folks can probably quibble about the 10 bubble teams that either just got in or didn't get in, the same way that we would get quibbling from the 10 bubble teams with 6 wins in your end that either just got in or just did not get in. Look at the scores the first round of the playoffs. I think a reasonable person would look at the amount of one-sided scores and say, why would we want more teams in the playoffs? Why would we want more 8-0s versus 0-8s? So our football committee, which they do each and every year, and by the way, talking about this is a little bit like politics and taxes. As long as we have a football playoffs, we are going to be talking about playoff format. That is going to come with the territory. The same way at the NFL level and the college level, they're talking about the end of their season. How many teams should get in? What teams should get in? Those kinds of things. So I do know that there's a couple of different models out there that'll get some more conversation, but for at least right now, I think a lot of folks in our state look at our football playoffs and the really successful 5-week run this year. And I guess what exactly needs fixing? Again, looking at those scores, I'm not sure that there's a loud clamoring that we need more 50-0 games in that first week. So stay tuned.
Okay. Okay. So let's, winter sports have started, a lot of conversation, this year with basketball and all that stuff. And of course, obviously some rule changes nationally with the 1-on-1 fouls and stuff. How is winter sports kind of starting for you guys? And, just while we're on the topic of basketball, where are we, are there any imminent changes coming possibly in the basketball world?
So the big national playing rule change is that 1-on-1s have disappeared from high school basketball. That your team fouls now reset after each quarter. Once a team picks up their 5th team foul in a quarter, the other team shoots 2 shots. So all free throws now in our game are 2 shots, whether it be on a shooting foul or whether it be after the 5th foul in a quarter. We continue to survey our schools about shot clock. There isn't strong support from that. Very little support from athletic directors. A little more support from coaches, but again, is not necessarily very overwhelming. So I think that, when it comes to the end of the season, our Basketball Coaches Association, BCAM, they've got some different ideas about seating and just, how districts and regionals would be organized. I'm sure that will get more conversation here as the school year goes on, but no, winter is off and running. Looking outside of my window and seeing brown grass with no snow, I do know the one sport that's really struggling here are downhill skiers. Given the fact that December has been a little bit more mild, we'd love to get some snow for our skiers, but other than that, winter is off and running.
Yeah. In terms of basketball and seeding, is there any potential? Because I know that I think it was proposed that I think BCAM proposed they would seed the entire region.
Mm-hmm.
Could that be possible down the road in the next few years? We talk about mixing up the districts or anything like that.
It'll get more conversation because I do think in our more metropolitan areas or more where we have more schools closer together, the regional seating makes a lot more sense. Because if you've got a group of 32 schools that are all within a half hour or 45-minute driving time, yeah, let's seed them all. Let's try and balance that as much as we can. Where regional seating begins to look worse and worse is the further north and the further northwest that you go. What that would do to travel in the Upper Peninsula and in the northern Lower Peninsula is a big deal. And I think it's also hard for folks to say, well, in the metro areas, let's seed the whole region, but in places where schools are more spread out, let's just do it the old way. Well, I don't think you can have a tournament where you're handling one group of schools this way and another group of schools a different way. So certainly if, we were a state like Connecticut or Rhode Island, it'd be easy because geography really isn't a problem. Well, the way that our state is set up with about 730 basketball schools sprinkled from Ontonagon to Temperance, Bedford, and every place in between, regional seating has some challenges. But we'll keep talking about it, keep looking at it, and we'll see where that conversation goes.
Yeah. So also, let's talk about hockey for a second. There's, I think I heard this, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I heard that there are more co-ops this year than standalone teams. Where do you think that's, do you think possibly, we could possibly go from 3 divisions down to 2? Where are we at in terms of, with the hockey playoffs with that?
So we have tweaked the way that we organize the 3 divisions in hockey. We take the number of co-op programs and we split those evenly by size in divisions 1, 2, and 3. And then we take our standalone teams that are students at their school and their school only. And then we also divide them equally across the 3 divisions. So we did that for the first time last year. I think we need to wait another year or 2 to see what kind of results that we get. Certainly co-ops in hockey are not being formed to create super teams. Co-ops in hockey get formed so that kids can play. And, we've got lots of co-ops with 3 or 4 or 5 schools. I wish I had the magic solution why more youth hockey players don't keep playing and play through their high school years. But like I said, big change last year to how we classified the 3 divisions of hockey. And we'll see here what year 2 brings.
In terms of other sports, where are we at in just the full winter sports picture? Are there any big changes that are of note besides the ones with the one-on-one fills for basketball?
The only thing I'll mention is that the numbers in girls wrestling continue to grow. It's probably the fastest growing sport in our nation. We're seeing it here in Michigan. Some of my colleagues in other states are seeing it as well. And I think the next decision right now, our girls individual tournament at Ford Field, right alongside with our boys. Right now, we're in 1 division, and it won't be long before we have to look at, adding a 2nd division. And really, really good news there on the growth front.
Are we adding any possibly new sports that the MHSAA will sponsor? Obviously, I know that there are 2 other sports like field hockey and boys volleyball that are really kind of gaining traction across the state. Are we anywhere close to adding, for the MHSAA sponsoring 2 new sports?
When our board met 2 weeks ago, we had a long conversation about emerging and new sports. The conversation right now includes girls field hockey, boys and girls water polo, boys volleyball, and there's even some conversation which is becoming an Olympic sport, flag football. What would that look like? So it was really the first kind of large scale full board discussion that we've had. We'll continue to get data from our schools. The challenge is whenever you add new sports, you're going to be creating new conflicts and new decisions for kids. And what you would hate to do is start to sponsor a new sport and it's going to, really kind of undercut your participation numbers in other sports. So it is on our radar. Like I said, it got to our full board, and we'll continue to get more feedback here during the school year.
Spring sports, any big changes that we're at there or no?
Just hoping for good weather. Nope. That'll be here before we know it. Like I said, the travel and competition rule, which is all sports, all seasons, was really the biggest tweak and change. And we'll see if our spring teams utilize that as much as what fall and winter did.
All right. Mark, always a pleasure to talk. We'll probably come on again after winter sports and we'll talk then.
Sounds good. Thanks, Casey.